This is something that I touched on in actually a couple of my last episodes, but I wanted to dedicate this to an episode by itself because of the gravity and the intensity and the absolute importance for us to understand this concept. And it is the concept of this, that if you cannot let something go, or you seem to keep experiencing something over and over again, it is because your belief system is what's holding on to it. And I know this might sound wild, but if you're able to wrap your heart around this message, you will likely free yourself from any burden, every confusing equation, any situation that may be kind of dumbfounding. It will literally set it all free right now. And I'm not even kidding. And the reason why I'm saying it as so profoundly such is because I have experienced it and I have seen it. And I want to give this gift to you, my dear friend. What this might sound like right now in your current life experience. I want to do this, but I can't because of this. I don't know why I'm feeling like this. I don't know why I won't just let this thing go. This is actually your subconscious speaking to you, helping you identify that you host and hold a belief somewhere within you. So it could be something that is very fresh in your mind, or more than likely, it is something that is buried deep within your heart. And essentially, this belief, wherever it is in your mind or in your heart, is holding this thing in your existence. It's not allowing you to let this thing go or change your course or do something different because of your belief that proves that thing. One of my favorite speakers on this topic, if you will, is actually Bashar. And Bashar speaks to this so beautifully in that it is our belief system, which is kind of the inner workings of all of our beliefs together. And or it's maybe only one specific belief that is making this thing true. It's making this thing correct. It's making this thing not possible. And until we take a moment to uncover and discover what that belief is, we will never be able to move beyond it. Because that is what's holding that thing, whatever it is, in your life experience, essentially hostage. And it can feel like that because you might be telling yourself, or you might be saying out loud something that's opposite of that belief. But until you can get into the nitty-gritty of what it actually is, you will continue to do this over and over and over. You will continue to see this over and over and over. So for example, and I'm going to give an exact example from my life, and I want to use this because it's absolutely just shows how a belief can impact us so greatly. So my life experience, unfortunately, I had a childhood that domestic violence was very prevalent. Just to, TLDR, my earthly father broke my nose, actually more than my nose, but shattered my septum over 20 pieces when I was 13 years old. I dealt with and navigated child abuse essentially for the majority of my childhood years. And my earthly father played professional football in the NFL. And so imagine he is a very tall, large man. Because of how often I didn't feel safe, because obviously I was in these scenarios and situations where I was oftentimes fighting for my life, I developed a fear around tall men. And I also developed a mindset that I would not date tall men because if I could date men who were around my height or shorter, to give you context, he is 6'4" and I am 5'6". So I had decided that I was going to date men that were around my height, around 5'6", or maybe a little taller, let's say up to 5'9", because I could look them in the eyes. There would be no towering over, there would be no basically power struggle with a physicality, which is really interesting Again, the more I think about it, it's like, wow. So imagine I had done this almost subconsciously. So I had just made this decision. I was not going to date tall men. And I will say my first long-term partner was shorter. He was a couple inches taller than me. As I left that 12-year relationship, I then started dating again. And my friend at the time told me, I don't understand, like, why don't you date someone who's tall? And I don't know why she was going on about how I needed to date someone that was tall, but this was her thing, right? And the funny thing is that at the time, I wasn't opposed to it. No, yeah, sure. Like, I'd consider that. But what's interesting is that when I would go on dating apps or I would meet men, I would naturally stay away from tall men without even choosing it. It wasn't even like intentional, or I would just not choose them as someone I would consider dating. And I noticed that my behavior would continue to follow that very deep-seated inner belief. And remember, that belief was planted in my heart when I was a kid. And as I was dating, which was in my 30s, literally like had forgotten about it. Like I didn't even know it existed. But I did know it was existing because my behavior, I kept acting that to be true. That even though I was open and willing to date someone who was taller, I never ended up dating someone who was taller. And I don't remember, if I'm really honest, what it was that allowed me to contemplate this. But the reason I want to share this with y'all as the example is because it's amazing how even though I had mentally thought like, yeah, I'm totally open to it, I wouldn't actually take action on it. And this opens up for a couple of different pieces of information that I want to share with y'all. So fundamentally, the first piece, if we have a belief or a belief system that prevents something, we won't do it. Or number two, if we don't have a belief or a belief system that supports something, we won't do it. And number three, if we have a belief or a belief system that confirms something or makes it true, we will do it. And then obviously, I'll throw out just a couple little variables. So depending on how serious it is, how deeply ingrained it is, maybe even how recent it is, as well as how many emotions are tied to it, this is what makes it kind of like cement. It becomes part of who we are. And then the longer that it sits there, the more that we kind of lose awareness of it. But it's always there. It's always affecting our actions. So using my example, even though I was open to, and I was telling my friends like, yeah, I'll date somebody who's taller, I never took action with someone who was taller. I just didn't. And it's funny because even thinking back on it, it wasn't even like I was repulsed. It wasn't like, ew, he's tall, gross. Like, no, that didn't come out. But it was like, oh yeah, he's attractive. But yeah, I don't know. I like this guy over here. Like, no, I'm good. And it's funny because those things were kept being confirmed basically over and over and over. So I had the belief that I was not going to date someone who was tall because it would put me in a situation of physicality where I could be controlled, or somebody could attempt to dominate me and hurt me. And because of that, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't date someone who was tall. I was introduced to Bob Proctor probably almost 2 years ago now, and I was listening to his Born Rich seminar, which I will put in the show notes for y'all. It's a great, like, it's wonderful. It's a little dated, but I love it. It's fabulous. He talks about two things. So first of all, he introduced me to an author by the name of Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And Dr. Maltz was essentially a plastic surgeon, but he wrote a book called Cybernetics that talks about the cybernetic mechanism basically in our mind, or to me, right in our heart, in that our belief system, what we believe, is what controls our behavior, to put it in another way. And Dr. Maltz talked about obviously a multitude of different examples, but I'll give Bob's examples because I think Bob did a great job as far as pulling together examples that suddenly just kind of bring this to light. So there's two cybernetic mechanisms he talked about in the Born Rich seminars. Number one is talking about autopilot on an airplane. So if you're flying to Cancun, the cybernetic mechanism in the plane is programmed to go to Cancun. Now, even on your way to Cancun, let's say you go through severe thunderstorms, so you kind of got to go around, or there's all this wind, turbulence and things. Okay, now you got to go the other way. You might make all these twists and turns, but you end up at the destination because it's programmed. So again, you might be flexible in the intermediary, and I'm thinking about myself. Sure, I'll date somebody who's tall, but where do I go? Where my belief system says I need to go, which is that I don't date men who are tall. Curious. So we have that, right, as far as programming. Bob talks about a second example being basically the cybernetic mechanism of our thermostat. So for like our HVAC, our heating, cooling. So essentially you're going to turn it to, let's say, 75 degrees. And if the room itself gets hotter than 75 degrees, it's going to turn the air conditioning on to bring the room back down to 75 degrees. And if for some reason the room, let's say it's cold outside, it gets colder than 75 degrees, it's going to turn on the heater to bring the temperature back up to 75 degrees. So how does this play into my example? My real life example. Well, when I'd make these decisions on dating apps, because maybe I'd be on a dating app and I'd see somebody and I don't know, somehow I know they're tall. And I'm like, or I see someone who might be shorter. So I'm like, oh yeah, I feel a little more compelled. So even though I am wavering in here, right? So I've got access to maybe men who are shorter and men who are taller on either side of the thermostat. I pretty much always come back down to, nope, not going to happen. I might consider it, but nah. And so the reason I give this kind of silly example, but real example, is to also share the depth of that. So enough time had passed that I didn't even know it existed in my heart. But it did exist because it was changing my course of action. Even though I kept telling myself, and again, my friend, I'm totally up for it. I'm saying things that sound good, sound reasonable. Sure, I'm not opposed to it. But when it came down to actually taking action, I wouldn't do it. So where do our beliefs originate? Let's talk about that first. Obviously, they can be around our family, around things we learned, around fears that were developed, whether they were chosen or not chosen. They could be in your heart, things you're trying to protect yourself from. They can be in your mind, things that you're trying to do or accomplish, or things you shouldn't do or should do. You develop a belief. Normally, how you can feel a belief, and this is funny enough why I have this podcast called Beyond the Belief, because when you hear a belief that you don't believe, it gets a little uncomfy. It gets a little prickly. It gets a little oh, interesting. Okay. And most of us, if we are not allowing ourselves to get back into that seat of the observer, if we're not allowing ourselves to just purview, just see what the options are, this is curious, right? Putting on our curiosity cap, if we are not doing those things, this is where the rigidity of actually burying it or even making like more and more casings of cement is how I actually kind of see it. It's like you have this belief and you just keep putting eggshells of more and more and more. So it becomes more and more indestructible because we're trying to protect it. And funny enough, this is what Michael A. Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul, speaks about, that we get to these places where we're trying to protect our stuff. And it feels icky and yucky when our stuff gets hit or knocked around or questioned. As I always say, any invitation to consider a belief allows you to do two things. If you've got a curious mind, you stay from the place of the observer and just understanding and seeing it. Number one, it gives you the opportunity to see something different than you've ever seen. And number two, it allows you to check in with your own beliefs and see if you might want to change them, because you could want to change your belief. There's nothing wrong with that. We as humans, we want so desperately to have the long term and permanence and predictability. We want these things so badly that we're willing to almost put ourselves into a prison of, nope, can't have that. It must be this. I chose this when I was 6 years old, and I will never choose anything different. You could do that. If you so choose, you could absolutely do that, because that could be part of your belief system, what you want for your life experience. And that's what I feel like beliefs are. They help us kind of navigate the path around what we're willing to consider, what we're willing to look at, which way we're going to go, because our beliefs do direct our actions. They do. And, going back to what I originally shared at the top of this episode, if you are in a position right now where you're trying to change something, you're trying to release something, or you're trying to stop doing something, or you're trying to start doing something, and you just can't. You keep trying and you just can't. There's a good chance that you have a cybernetic mechanism programmed. And that cybernetic mechanism is programmed based on a belief that is in your mind, in your heart, somewhere within you. And it could be something recent, or it could be, like in my case, something from childhood. Only when I sat down with myself, going back to my dating example, when I asked myself, why don't I date men who are taller? Like, why don't I? I'm sitting there thinking, like, I don't know. I mean, I think they're attractive. I'm not opposed to it. Like, why is this? Where is this coming from? And suddenly, in contemplating, I started thinking about my earthly father and my childhood experience, and realizing the emotions, the lack of power, the lack of being protected, the lack of feeling safe, that then created this thing in me at that time that my guess is I was probably 11 or so when I basically created this belief for myself, thinking that if I just didn't date anyone tall, at the time I probably said married, if I didn't get married to someone who was tall, then I would never have to feel those emotions. Ooh, is that the truth? No, it's not. There's another author who is one of my favorites. Her name is Byron Katie. She wrote one of my favorite books, I Need Your Love, Is That True? And essentially, she has what she calls the work. And it's a series of questions to basically question what you know, or what you think you know, or what you believe, and to turn those things around. Kind of observe it, open it up a little bit, just to kind of, is this true? Where did I get this from? So going back to my contemplation, I noticed, I remember this. I remember thinking that I would never have to feel these emotions if I just didn't marry someone who was tall. But those things are not correlated. There are many tall humans who I know who are amazing, amazing beings who would never physically hurt someone or try to make someone feel not safe, especially a child. I mean, my goodness, but who would never do that. So it's not a direct one-to-one. But as a kid, you kind of take things to the extreme that you can understand them. But I couldn't believe that I was a 30-something-year-old lady walking around with a 10-year-old's fear, a 10-year-old's belief. Holy cow. And because I got into that long-term relationship pretty young, about 23, that I was in for 12 years, I didn't have to think about this very much. I didn't have to think about dating. And then when I started dating again, that's when it kind of came up. So imagine it just kind of laid dormant within me. So my invitation to you, my dear friend, through this lovely example, is this. It is time to look at the things that either keep repeating in your life experience, or things that you want to change that you just can't for some reason. You either can't stop or you can't start, and you just don't know why. There is a belief within you that makes that thing true. So I'll just give an easy one. I want to lose 10 pounds. But every time I try to do it, I just can't do it. Why can't I? Well, it comes down to the exercise part. I don't feel motivated. Why? Why don't I? Why wouldn't this be a positive thing? Well, when I used to work out in my early 20s, I used to believe that I looked weird working out. And so I never developed the confidence in doing so. Or I don't want to ask for help. Because if I have to ask for help, that means that I'm weak. Or the only way for me to do this is to get a personal trainer. And personal trainers are really expensive. We start to uncover the beliefs that make that thing true. And then that's the thing you kind of hang your hat on, because you're like, well, personal trainers, they're just really expensive. That's the only way I can do it. So looks like I'm not going to lose weight. And then we start to contemplate, is this related? So invite yourself to ask questions. Why do I do this? There's an old trick of asking why 5 times you get to the root cause. Okay, why is that? Okay, why is that? Interesting. Okay, but why is that? Why is that? Why is that? And then you get to the root of, I don't believe in myself. I don't want to do this. I don't think I need to lose weight. I don't want to lose weight for so-and-so who says I need to. You start to get to the root of your why. And that is where you can identify the belief that exists that is making it so impossible to get started on exercising or to open your horizons and date taller men. Whatever it may be. Some good indicators on the belief side that I'll just share because I think they're super helpful. Notice when you feel personally hurt by something someone says that might not necessarily directly be at you. So they're not, necessarily saying like, oh, you're this, but they might say, I love tall guys. And in my case, I'd be like, okay, well, that's good for you. Well, now I know who to send the tall guys to. Like, something kind of hurts. It's a little prickly. It's a little like, oh, I don't like that. That might be a belief. And this might be a belief that needs to be examined, that needs to be invited to your table to have a conversation, to get to the why of 5 times, to understand how it exists, why it exists, what is existing for. In my case, to go back to my last example, is me getting injured as a child relevant to me now in my early 40s? For all intents and purposes, not really. It's a totally different living scenario. It's a different relationship with the world. I have different rights and responsibilities now as an adult. Like, there are totally different things. Why am I then allowing a belief that I developed when I was 10, let's say, now affect me at 40? Because I'm choosing to. Because I'm not inviting it to the table. Because I'm not looking at it. So again, just a point of contemplation. Notice situations where you get opinionated or that you have to declare your opinion. Well, I think this. Well, that sounds crazy because I think this is right or that's right. Those are speaking to beliefs that you have. Because imagine if you didn't have any belief about it. Let's say we're going to talk about candles. If you have no relationship to candles, you're like, okay, I have a candle. I've lit a few candles in my life and that's about it. If somebody starts going off about how, Bed Bath & Beyond is so much better than candles at Target, you're probably going to be like, okay, like, cool, like, noted. I didn't know that. Because you don't have a belief that makes that true or not true. But if you do know about candles, and I said that to you, and you're like, oh no, Target is where it's at. Now we have a belief that makes that true. That's why it programs you and allows you or pushes you or entices you to always spend money at Target on candles. You wouldn't go to Bed Bath & Beyond. You would only go to Target. So it's funny how these things, again, show up, have an appearance. Think about that. If you didn't have a belief, you wouldn't have an opinion. Something to ponder. And then looking at your non-negotiables. What are your non-negotiables and why are your non-negotiables? There's things that we can all agree on that, let's say, physical violence is not something I invite into my experience. Okay. But there are things that I have to have clean carpet lines when I vacuum. And if I don't have clean carpet lines that are completely 90-degree angle, then I'm going to lose my marbles. This is a belief. What does that belief say about you? As in, what do those carpet lines say about you? Why is that so important? I bet you if you felt into it, invited it to the table, maybe your mom or your dad or your auntie was the one who said, it must be like this or it's not clean. And you believed it and you held on to it. And that became part of your belief system. And then you were kind of ninja chopping anybody who's going to step on your carpet lines. But it makes us change our actions. So if there's anything, again, for you that you're having a challenge either doing or not doing, it's tied to a belief. And I will leave you with this, that it's a good idea. It's kind of like housekeeping, to take an inventory of your beliefs. Look at your beliefs. Why do you believe what you believe? Because, my friends, the only constant in life is change. This means the only thing we can count on is that things will continue to change. Sometimes they change very rapidly. Sometimes they take forever to change. Whatever the duration is, change is the only constant. So if there are things that we are holding on to that we refuse to change, that we refuse to look at, even in those examples of I do not invite in physical violence or I do not invite in things that are not peaceful, those should still change. They should still evolve. They should become bigger, more peace, less violence, more environments that support this. Now it's not only about your home, now you're helping to expand that into your communities. It should always be about expansion and beyond. So if there's opportunities for you to sit down, invite your beliefs to the table, or use some of those things to kind of observe. When do I get opinionated? When do I have opinions? What are my opinions? What are my non-negotiables? Because in contemplating those, it might invite you to see something from a different perspective. Allow this to be an opportunity and an invitation to look into your beliefs. Because if you can get to the epicenter of the why, you will find out why you're not able to do something, or you're not starting something or stopping something. Whatever that thing is, it will reveal itself. And then at that point, you can make a decision. Sending you all my love and light, and happy exploring your beliefs.